Hi, it's Bright here, and welcome back to my son's modelling room. And you'll have to excuse the noise in the background. I'm competing with some of he and his buddies who are playing Dungeons and Dragons. So those boys are in the back playing fantasy, and I thought I'd talk about something which I guess to some people sounds like fantasy, but is real. I've had a difficult couple of months, so I'm not at my best today. My tumours have been really hurting, so I thought I'd talk about something that I've been wanting to talk about before I get off the internet. And those of you who are familiar with my videos know that there was a whole bunch of stuff that I wanted to talk about under the Alienology umbrella, and I just don't have the energy or the time to do that anymore. But there is one issue that I'd like to talk about, and just at least plant a seed. And I suppose the way that I look at this is maybe I'm aiming for just one person who will get it, who can take that seed and do something with it, because I think a lot of people won't get it. And hopefully if that person is then able to do something with it, then it will have a dramatic impact. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about, and maybe I'll make another video on this, I did say that I was going to get off, and really haven't had the energy for making videos, which is why I haven't finished the July Contact series that I started. Particularly the last couple of days, my tumours have just knocked the crap out of me, so doing the best that I can anyway. So the issue that I wanted to talk about today was the state of what I call alienology, which is really a subject that demands a better name, and I really have issues with the whole name of exopolitics. I think that the whole notion of exopolitics misses the mark completely when it comes to talking about our alien friends and that broader cosmology and our relationships with them. And what I want to talk a little bit about is a parallel, and that's the perception of spirituality. And I want to reference in particular one person who I think has single-handedly turned on its head and revolutionised how we look at spirituality. And that person is Ken Wilber, and some of you will be familiar with Ken and his work on integral spirituality. I've been reading Ken's journals, One Taste, and I read a lot of Ken's other works, and the story of his wife and the death of his wife, Grace and Grit, and later integral spirituality. And I guess I've been touched by the depth of Ken's thinking and the fact that he's willing to really cut through all the bullshit and say how things really are and how he sees things. And for anybody who doesn't know Ken Wilber, he's a philosopher of sorts. I guess he might say he's even a scientist who has looked at philosophy and spirituality and looked across the board at everything from indigenous spirituality to all the contemporary forms that we have, to more traditional schools like Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and all the schools within all these spiritual traditions. And he's pulled out the essence of their teachings and created a model for an integrated form of spirituality that takes the best of all worlds. And he has presented a conceptual model that allows an individual human being to truly grow spiritually. And he's also developed that into a pragmatic model. He talks about the idea of translation and transformation, and transformation is the real process of growth. And what he says is that most people who believe that they are spiritual, so-called spiritual, go through the process of translation and actually go through serious transformation. And I'm not going to go into depth to explain what that means. I suggest you pick up one of Ken's books and you'll get a better sense of it, or go to his website and read a little bit about his ideas of integral spirituality. But to give you a rough sense of what he talks about and then how this applies to alienology, a lot of people talk about spirituality, and I'll give you a really simple example. I've worked for many years in Aboriginal communities, and I have a great deal of respect for Aboriginal people. My great-grandmother was an Aboriginal woman, and I think that we have a lot to learn from Indigenous people. But one of the things that I saw in Aboriginal communities was they would talk about this idea of, spiritual, being on the spiritual path, and are you spiritual, brother? We have a serious spirituality here. And what I saw after many years was that for the most part, the sense of spirituality amongst Aboriginal people is, it's kind of distorted, if you like. It's distorted and it's simplified. In essence, what it means is, are you able to believe in spirits? Are you able to believe in magic? Are you able to believe in a connection to the earth and the web of life? Although that's very myopic for some Aboriginal people. And there's a lot of superstition in all Aboriginal cultures, but especially in the Australian Aboriginal culture. And so the belief in the spiritual is the belief in these superstitions, and that magic and deep connection can happen, and that there are people with magical powers and special abilities. And then there is a softer, more subtle belief in the connection to the land and feeling more for the land rather than concrete and steel. And it's that basic web of life principle. And so what I see in most, not all, there are very few people that get it who are beyond this, and I would say that many of the more traditional people, and there aren't many of those, many of the truly traditional people who still connect with land on a daily basis get this. There is a real depth to authentic Aboriginal spirituality, and it goes back through an unbroken line back to those people who understood the law, what traditional people call the law, which is basically a set of rules handed down to them about how to live. Rules for everything, rules for how to interact with the land, rules for how and when to hunt, rules for places that you could and couldn't go, rules for relationships, for marriage. There are all kinds of aspects to the law. And I think that some traditional people who had a real deep connection to the law, they have a direct connection to their ancestors, and they have more of an appreciation of a legitimately authentic spirituality. Words are a little bit difficult here, but that's how I would describe it. Whereas most Aboriginal people these days have what Ken Wilber would describe as this kind of new age, web of life kind of appreciation of spirituality, which is really only very superficial. It's neck deep in superstition, in out-of-body travel, astral travel, in these superficial aspects of spirituality. In other words, it moves extensively across the one kind of very basic level. It translates, if you like. There's no transformative depth that integrates far deeper understandings of spirituality. And so that's the case for many Aboriginal people who themselves have lost their way, and many of their people are afflicted with drugs, alcohol, poverty, transgenerational loss, grief, trauma. And I empathise with Aboriginal people who are in that situation that white men predominantly have created. But they themselves have lost many of the choices that they could make, or that ability to make choices these days. And so those that do have some kind of spirituality tend to have this superficial form of spirituality, and it isn't an all-embracing spirituality that has as its foundation compassion and interconnectedness. It's really very short-sighted and selfish and predominantly focused on what can I get. So it's unfortunate that that situation is prevalent. And having said that, it does bind communities and it does help communities. But for the most part, it isn't helping to bridge the gaps that are responsible for the hostility between black and white, the hostility within families, within generations, and the differences that set these contemporary Aboriginal people apart from their ancestors. Having said that, their ancestors would have a very difficult time surviving in the modern world. But that's just one example of where there is this idea of what spirituality is, but in fact it's a bastardized idea of spirituality that comes from ignorance, comes from having lost your way. And I've met and worked with many Aboriginal people who draw inspiration and strength from New Age writings. One person that I was working with who comes to mind, she was always reading a writer who was talking about the violet flame and about astral travel. But there was no real developmental aspects to the work. There was very little that talked about how to work through relationships, how to work through hurt, how to cultivate mindfulness, how to cultivate compassion, how to cultivate that sense of choices and being able to make choices and make decisions and where decisions take you. Instead it was fluffy kind of stuff. It was, very touchy, feely, doesn't require you to do much work or to broaden your vision or to open your heart. And it's unfortunate because this person had significant wounds and was looking for answers somewhere. And I've discovered that there are a lot of Aboriginal people who are in the same situation. But if I was to expand away from Aboriginal people, and I'm quite sure that I would find the same for all Aboriginal people anywhere in the world, but if I was to expand out and look at your average person who's drawn to New Age material, I think you might find the same thing. They're seeking something. They find somebody who is able to offer them some kind of antidote, some kind of solution, some kind of something to quench the craving, and they're satisfied. And so they may think the answer lies in getting their vibration right, and having enough crystals in the house, or utilising the secret and knowing that all they need to do is have a storyboard or a vision board or whatever they call it with all of what they want in their life, and if they feel it's going to be true, then it will come true. What you rarely see amongst people who seek out this kind of material is a willingness to do hard work and to look at themselves and their own lives, to map their families and the family history, to look at the developmental issues and the issues around loss and grief and trauma, and to understand themselves, and then to take that understanding and understand the broader world. occasionally there is something around that in the New Age, but I would say that it touches lightly in that area. And I suppose a lot of what channeling promises is the idea of infinite wisdom from sources beyond us. And many people get caught up in that and don't ask questions about how does channeling work? Who's being channeled? Is this an authentic external entity, or is this an aspect of self? And if so, can I do that? Have to pause. Sorry about that. So very few people are willing to push the boundaries of understanding with any of the material that they come in contact with. And so if you were to ask the question, who are the people who are deeply spiritual in our society? I think at first you would be drawn to say it's the people who read a lot about it, or it might be religious people, or it might be people who practice a lot, or it might be people who practice elements of something, people who meditate a lot. But I think you would find that in all these different camps, very few people embrace spirituality from an integral point of view. Very few people work on the many different aspects of development, of individual development, of relationship development, of community development. Very few people are willing to move beyond this sense of seeking and being caught up in the perpetual seeking, and to really embrace the fact that we are part of the all. You know, a lot of people will talk about that, but it rarely moves beyond words. So what I like about Ken Wilber is, even though I guess if you don't know him well, he seems quite egotistic, and he's willing to admit that himself, he is willing to suggest a solution to the problem of human suffering, and that is to look at how we practice and say where are the strengths and where are the weaknesses, and how can we draw from other things to complement the deficits. And I think that he has a lot to offer. Has a lot to offer individuals, communities, groups, collectives. But very few people are willing to look honestly at his work and to consider it as part of their own development. So I've been a fan of Ken Wilber for a long time. I used to think that he was very egotistic, and then I discovered the story of the loss of his wife to cancer and his journey through that. And I realised here is a man who's suffered greatly, who has tried to integrate his own understanding, not just from books that he's read, but from his own individual suffering, his own journey through losing somebody that he loved very much. So do yourself a favour, if you ever get a chance, read Grace and Grit, the story of his wife Treya and losing her. It's an incredible love story and very, very touching. So where I'm headed is, what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that we have a great model in integral spirituality created by Ken Wilber. Ken does have critics and he does have many supporters, and I suggest, if you're interested in this, become familiar with both sides. So Ken is an integrator. And then we have other teachers of spirituality, and the one that comes to mind is Dadaji, who is now deceased but still with us in other ways. And Dadaji was a teacher who I became aware of only recently in the last 2 years, and he taught that we are all one with the all, with him, with God, and all that we do is within the realm of God. And he didn't use the intellectual approach of the likes of Ken Wilber. and yet was able to affect a great many people with many so-called miracles, although he never called them that. And I think light a fire in the hearts of many who were looking for a teacher who was not a guru, who abhorred the idea of gurus. And so these great non-intellectual teachers can also teach us how to arrive at these great transformative stages by experience. And whilst Ken can certainly point the way in terms of experience, it's his intellect that helps us to understand which way to go. Whereas people like Dadaji, it's the felt presence of his love, I suppose, his connection to the Creator, his acknowledgement that we are all within the body of God. So I recommend considering both of those paths, if you like, as a way to understand spiritual development. But what I'd like to do is say that our intellect is a useful thing, and I suppose one camp that a lot of people belong to is the camp that says we should do away with the intellect and just go by the heart. But then there is another camp that says intellect only must lead the way. And I've always thought that it's both intellect and heart. And I think what's lacking in modern, I hesitate to use words here, but I have to use a word, I have to choose a word. If you were to look at the broad phenomenon, which is UFOlogy, which is exopolitics, which is alien abductees, alien experiences, alien contactees, the whole phenomenon, which many people put under exopolitics. If you were to look at that, you would see that it's a mess. It really is a mess. It's all over the place. And what's happened is the same process that's happened to spirituality. And that process is that there has been a very slow and gradual development of our awareness of this phenomenon, whether it's an awareness of this phenomenon in the sky or around us, in the external world, or this phenomenon internally. And so we've been grasping our way, fumbling our way, trying to make sense of things. And as with any discipline, there hasn't been any cohesion, it's just been pieces everywhere. And I suppose, I'll applaud the exopolitics folks in one sense, that they've tried to bring some cohesion to the picture. But what's lacking is a clear model that embraces all parts of the phenomenon, and that name certainly isn't all embracing. And it's very personality driven. Whereas with an idea like integral spirituality, we have a name and a concept and an idea and a very clear framework for something that provides an all-embracing spirituality. And what we are lacking in this field is an all-embracing framework, concept, idea, even a name for UFOs, aliens, our relationships with them, and the experiences that people are having, and also the relationships that individual power structures have been having with them for a long time. We lack this overarching structure, and because we lack this overarching structure, much of the field isn't taken serious by many scientists, it isn't taken serious by many other disciplines such as sociology, such as psychology, even therapy, even many different religions such as Buddhism. And for the most part, it has evolved in such a way as to kind of look absurd. You know, it looks like an absurd mess. We have, I guess, produced enough personalities within the whole field to attract the wrong kind of attention and to really give the field a bad name at times. And so, even though there are many good people, it's often the squeaky wheel, the loud wheel that attracts the attention, and that has been the case. And because the media has played a significant part in deterring any real interest in this subject and poking fun at the subject, we haven't had prolonged exposure to the subject in a serious way. So now the best source of information about all of this is something like YouTube. And YouTube is also full of people in the New Age movement, nothing against them, but many of them are kind of all over the place and a bit lost. And many individual people who are having these experiences don't have a framework for them or a well-developed spirituality. And I have nothing against anybody. We're all in the position that we're at. We can only have what we have. So what I'm suggesting is that we need to develop a very clear framework that is all-embracing around this subject. And if we're to do that, then we might consider that we have an overall discipline that takes this subject very serious. And within that discipline, there could be sub-disciplines. So to give you an example, I have shared my belief that I've had contact with extraterrestrials. And I've had very real physical contact with them. I'm in contact with somebody who worked for a government who had those experiences. And it's been an external journey and an internal journey. So just out of my contact experiences, there's a number of disciplines that might be relevant to understanding what I've gone through. There could be people in the scientific fraternity, different types of biologists who could do biological work, looking at any differences in my physiology linked to my contact experiences, whether or not they were differences that were created or differences that came about from the experiences, or differences in how my brain works, or my mind works. It's also a fascinating area for a psychologist to explore what makes a person tick and what kind of personality has these experiences, what kind of temperament has these experiences, or in terms of my life journey, how these experiences have shaped my perception of my story or my life journey or my spiritual development. Or somebody who's looking at theology may be able to catalogue, explore, understand how this has shaped my spiritual journey, or how my spiritual journey shaped my perception of this. And then there are the physical aspects, you know, the body marks and the distortions of time and space and seeing craft. You know, there is some kind of physicality, some kind of physical dimension there that would be interesting to somebody in a scientific field. I couldn't tell you which, but somebody who could try to explore any evidence that I have of that, or when things arise. So to give you an example of what I'm thinking of here, we have, and maybe in a future video, if I do make any more videos, I might explore this in depth with one more video. If we were to create a framework and somebody were to create an institution dedicated to this kind of framework, just as there's the Integral Institute and a university, I think, dedicated to that framework of embracing spirituality. If we had I'm not saying this is the only path, but if we had such an institute devoted to this kind of thing, we could have individual disciplines and individual teams. And, for example, somebody is an experiencer and they wish to explore their experiences, then you could contact that team. You would find appropriate people who are interested in working with you around that experience. It could be a therapist, it could be somebody who does some kind of regression work, it could be somebody who does some of the blood chemistry, it could be somebody who looks at the spiritual aspect, it could be somebody who wants to look at the physical evidence, it could be any number of those things. And then, if you so desire, that information is shared. Information could be collated, stored, compiled, analysed, built up over many different years, many different domains, whether it's years or geography, age group, whatever. And so we have the chance to really consolidate all this information. Now, of course, as in my own case, some people may be very private about that and not want to share all the intimate details, and so that information doesn't go into the collective pool. I don't have a problem with that. But what I am saying is that we can learn a great deal more about ourselves in this phenomenon if we were to look at it as a much bigger discipline with a very clear framework. A framework, I should mention, that is always flexible and always evolving as we learn more, expand our own perception of the phenomenon. So exopolitics doesn't do that. Exopolitics is limited to personality interests. It doesn't have a clearly defined framework that is all-embracing in that way. Just as we have the idea of science, we have many different types of science within science, and within each science. For example, I trained as a biologist, but my specialty was microbiology originally. Biology has, I don't know how many disciplines within it, but there are many. So we can have all of these specialties, people coming from other fields, bringing their expertise to this phenomenon. And then within this framework, we can have people gradually, generation by generation, developing a specialty within this framework, within the framework of alienology or whatever it is called, and developing very specialized expertise that is also plugged back into the rest of the framework so that they can then broaden their own knowledge and what they bring to that discipline. Just as modern physics has informed some cutting-edge aspects of biology, and physics has informed consciousness, and consciousness has informed some of the modern physics and even chemistry and material science. Just as our own scientific disciplines are sort of merged like this and are interwoven and overlapping, we could potentially develop these multidisciplinary approaches to this whole phenomenon that feed into and share with one another. And then, of course, they're not just specialised things that are just self-nurturing. They expand outwards and share with the community, share with the whole world, and there's a kind of open transparency, if you like, so that this is not just secluded and specialist knowledge and people are cut out and suddenly we have all this power and information built in one place. No, it can't be like that. It has to be open and transparent. There may be different levels of transparency, but it has to have transparency to some degree. Otherwise it serves no function to the greater good. And that's what it has to be about. It has to have an existence based primarily on transforming the way that we understand our reality. And to do that, you need to be open. So that's my basic idea, I guess, about getting much more serious about looking at this phenomenon, getting past the crap of, do UFOs really exist and contactees really exist? Are these people crazy? maybe some are, and maybe some experiences aren't real, and some UFOs are other phenomenon. But we know that within this whole apparent phenomenon, there is a legitimate phenomenon. And we have so much to learn about it that could transform who we are and transform the way that we interact with our world and the cosmos. But I think the first thing that we would need to do is to map the whole picture, and it's a very big picture that embraces many things. It is UFOs and the physicality of those objects. It is the interactions that people are having with UFOs, such as the ET Let's Talk group. There are the documentarians, such as those who made Sirius and other people who are exploring the phenomenon, trying to capture the phenomenon where it is at a date and time and trying to share that with the world. There are the people who are doing regression therapy and the other therapists who are working with people. There are the individual groups for abductees and contactees and experiencers, and all of those groups who see their own camp differently. And there is the whole perception of the benevolent and the malevolent ET and the others who see something entirely different. And there's the physical interaction with people. Something happens to their bodies, and there is a journey there when you interact with an alien over a lifetime. Something happens through that whole experience. And then there is the astrobiology. You know, we have beings coming from elsewhere. Where are they from? What are they doing? And what's their relationship to this part of the universe? I couldn't even begin to map this, but that's the stepping stone. We need people to step up and say, here's a map of this whole picture, this whole apparent phenomenon now and across the past. And this is where it could go in the future. And this is the map. And from this map, we can develop a kind of framework. And here are some people who might fit into that framework, who might be interested in that framework. Here are some organisations who may be willing to fund that kind of work. And maybe we need to find philanthropists who are serious about creating this framework and creating this network of people. And it can't be localised in one country, it must be global, just like the ET Let's Talk group. If we're to develop this kind of framework, this kind of concept, ideology, disciplines within discipline, network of people, there's no reason why it can't have great power to transform our view of reality and to help people who are having experiences to understand these experiences. What we have too much of and not enough of is we have too many people speculating, too many people who aren't well developed spiritually. And I'm going to say that, I'm going to be honest. It's like Ken Wilber says about the New Age people. It'd be like somebody who reckons they're an expert in interpreting dreams suddenly telling you all about what the ETs are really about just because they know all the symbols from a book. We need people to share, we need dialogue, we need discussion, we need healthy sharing, healthy debate. We need to bridge the gap to those in covert positions who have power and understanding. This is the only way we'll grow as human beings. So I guess what I'm saying is that with the right structure in place, this whole phenomenon can grow in leaps and bounds, and we can help people who are having experiences to understand them better, and we can collectively help our whole civilization. So this is just one little video, and I'm just one small person. And this is my idea and my wish for future generations. And I guess all I'm trying to do is just reach that one person who gets this, that one person who can do something with this. As I've said, I don't know whether I will get through this cancer and how long I'll be around, but if I could leave that, then that would be worthwhile. So if you're somebody who has the means and the will to do something about this, feel free to contact me. This interests me a great deal. But otherwise, thank you for getting through this video. and thank you for being patient with me as I float through all of my ideas and my wild ramblings, and for getting through another diatribe event and coming back and watching another video. Thank you very much, and I'll try and continue the July Contact series very soon. Hopefully when I do, I'll have had a better time with my health and be a bit more energetic. Thank you, take care, be happy and be well. Rock on.